Hi, everyone. Welcome to the April 9th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, TimeformUS Analyst, and I'm pretty excited for this show because we'll be looking back on last weekend, which featured the runnings of the Wood Memorial, the Bluegrass, and the Santa Anita Derby. It was one of the final rounds of Kentucky Derby preps, and I think we finally got a little bit of clarity on this three-year-old picture. We'll also discuss some of the other stakes action from the undercards at Keeneland, Aqueduct, and Santa Anita, and I'm interested to talk to my co-host Craig about some of the track bias that might have cropped up at Keeneland on Saturday, as well as some of the speed figure decisions that he had to make as he was determining the numbers that all of these horses were going to be assigned. So with that, I'll welcome in my co-host Craig Milkowski. Craig, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to talk about this week. A lot of big racing. Like you said, we definitely got a little more clarity. It'd have been impossible to get less, I think, but finally got a little bit of horses we can latch onto as possible favorites for the Derby and a lot of other great racing on the undercards as well.
Yeah, I really enjoyed following all the racing this weekend. There were a lot of really impressive performances, and we'll start by talking about the three-year-old prep races because I think those were the main stories, and we'll take them in chronological order, beginning with the Wood Memorial at Aqueduct on Saturday. And I think we've got to begin by discussing about the trips because there was quite a pile or just an incident going into the first turn. I'm not really sure how to term it. I think it was mostly caused by the number 11 horse Jovia, who was crossing over to try to get rail position heading into the clubhouse turn, but it really caused some problems for a bunch of horses, including the eventual winner Tacitus, who overcame that adversity and went on to win the race. Tacitus was impressive in victory, and I think he's towards the top of a lot of people's Kentucky Derby lists following this effort.
Yeah, I was impressed with both of the top two, to be honest. It was just a good effort. I really like Tacitus's tactical speed that he has. The pace was pretty quick once again, but, he was able to lay in fourth. Granted, he was several lengths back, but the top two had kind of separated themselves from the rest of the field. There was some rough riding going on, as you said, and not just at the start. I think it was a little rough in the stretch with Tacitus kind of coming in on tacks quite a bit. I wasn't sure exactly what the inquiry was. I assume they looked at both incidents and they left it as is, which I think was the right call. But just a good effort. And like I said, they both impressed me. I liked how game Tax was. He didn't give in without a fight. And then, Tacitus is really the first horse to step up and win two of these races. And I like how he's looked in both of them.
Yeah, I do want to briefly touch upon and clarify what happened into the first turn, at least from my perspective, watching a few different angles. It looked like Nick Juarez on Jovia was really intent on getting to the front and crossing over. And unfortunately, it looked like he moved over without really looking behind him a couple of times and over-delivered. The number 6 horse for Todd Pletcher really took the worst of it. It's actually a miracle that he didn't go down. I saw some of Barbara Livingston's photos of the incident, and his legs were really crossed up with Jovia's hind legs as they made the bend into the first turn. And Tacitus took a hard bump, and Final Jeopardy was just totally eliminated in that incident. I mean, he's a closer anyway, but he really was studied out to the back of the pack. And from there, Jovia went over to the rail and caused Tax to kind of jump over his heels to go outside of him, and that caused another chain reaction of horses getting spun out wide, including both Pletcher horses. So it's just unfortunate that a few horses in this field were cost their best chances. They weren't able to really deliver competitive performances. It affected Tacitus, but Tacitus, I think, showed in this race that he has a pretty good mind on him. He's still learning the game, and he's still a little bit green, but he was able to settle as they moved on to the backstretch and get into a nice rhythm right behind Tax. I thought, as you were saying, I thought Tax ran really well. He sort of made the first move into that pace, which was on the fast side. Tacitus got right on top of him, and I thought Tacitus was leaning on Tax a little bit towards the end of the race. He kind of showed that greenness that's still evident, but I don't think Tacitus in particular is going to have any trouble stretching out to the 1.25 miles of the Derby, given his pedigree. He's a son of Close Hatches, who was just a brilliant race mare. She won a number of Grade 1 races and was really good from her 3-year-old to 4-year-old season. It just seemed to be getting better throughout her career, and she had no trouble with distance. So I think that's one of the reasons why people are so optimistic about Tacitus. He just has that potential to keep improving as we move on to the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, and I have Max mentioned the actual number. He ran a 120 TimeformUS speed figure, which stacks up really well both this weekend and what we've seen so far along the Triple Crown Trail. And I do want to mention, you mentioned Nick Juarez's ride. He did get a pretty stern suspension from the stewards. I think it was 15 days, which doesn't sound terrible, but given the standard that's usually set, I think the stewards are really making a statement.
Yeah, and I think it's deserved. And the horse was disqualified as well from I believe he finished 6th or 7th. Especially in this current climate that we're in the racing industry, stuff like that can't be going on. You have to be more careful. I know everyone's in it to win it, and their jockeys are as competitive as anybody else, but that was taking too big of a risk. And before we wrap up the Wood, the two other performances I do want to mention are those of High Call and Not That Brady. High Call is probably going to move on to the Kentucky Derby off his third place finish here, coupled with his win in the Gotham. He does have enough points. Some people like horses with his kind of running style in the Kentucky Derby on the chance that the race might fall apart. I thought High Call ran fine in this race. I'm not sure he really validated that he wants to go this far. In my opinion, he was just sort of picking up pieces at the end. And Not That Brady's a horse that I want to get your perspective on, Craig, because he got a 120 TimeformUS speed figure, which is the same number as Tacitus. Of all the horses that were involved in the pace, he was the only one that was around at the end. I was very skeptical of him going into this race off his non-effort in the Gotham, but he actually ran a sneaky good race in here.
He did. I was really surprised. I was surprised to see him in the entries off that last race, but I guess the trainer knew what he was doing. He maybe found an excuse that day and figured something out. I think what we saw is he probably just doesn't want to go this far. But he's a New York bred, I believe, if memory serves. So if they choose to go into those races, he should dominate the local New York breds. I agree with you on High Cal. He took a step back in the speed figure department from a 118 to a 114. I didn't really think he wanted the 9 furlongs of the Wood, and I certainly don't think he'll win any part of the Derby. The only real thing I want to say, add to this is I think a race like this with all the trouble and the traffic, it's probably a good experience for the horses that ran well, because they're certainly going to see a lot of that in the Derby.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue, because a lot of people are saying out of this Wood that these horses did have to overcome adversity, and that might not be the case for the next two races we're going to mention. The Bluegrass at Keeneland, it was generally regarded going in as the weakest of these three prep races in terms of field quality. It drew a large competitive field of 14 runners, but there was a clear favorite in Vekoma. And I think the only question for Vekoma going in was, could he get the 9 furlongs? Because I don't think anybody would dispute that he's the most talented horse who would run the fastest races. And I think he pretty much answered those questions. He could get the 9 furlongs against mediocre competition at best. I still have a lot of questions about Vekoma moving on to the Kentucky Derby, but he probably outran my expectations in this race. I do want to give him credit for that.
Yeah, he ran well. He got a 119 speed figure for me. It's ugly to look at, as I'm sure you're going to get to with his running style and the way his action is. But it's the way he always runs, so I guess you got to take it for what it's worth. I didn't think much of this field, as you did neither. I thought Vekoma really laid over him. I thought I was going to get a nice overlay when he was 3-1, but he really got hammered late down to 7-5. And the only real horse I thought had a chance of beat him was Some Like It Hot Brown. Not that I thought he was the second most likely winner, but if somebody was going to beat Vekoma, I thought maybe it could be him if he took the dirt. And I think he actually ran pretty well. I imagine he'll probably be put back on turf as we start getting more important races in that division. But I was really impressed with him. He's a very talented horse. He's shown he can run well on 3 surfaces now. So other than that, Vekoma going forward, I guess, is the one that you'd want in the Derby. Out of this field, I'm not a fan of win-win-win. I think he kind of sucked up similar to High Cal. I don't think he's a real quality closer that's going to look good at 10 furlongs. So,
yeah, the 3 winners of these prep races, I think people are regarding Vekoma the lightest. They're not as high on him as the other 2. What I will say about Vekoma is he kind of reminds me of Good Magic from last year, because Good Magic had been a very fast 2-year-old, came back and disappointed off the layoff in the Fountain of Youth, and then he won the Bluegrass in reasonably fast time, but it wasn't the most visually impressive win, and people were kind of writing him off, moving on to the Kentucky Derby. And as I think about Vekoma more in relation to the other 3-year-olds, I know he doesn't have the pedigree to be a classic Derby type of horse, but he's run just as fast as everybody else, and I'm not going to be shocked if Acoma's right in the mix at the 8th pole of the Derby, because he does have a ton of talent, and he's got that tactical running style where he doesn't get headstrong. He can just kind of continue at a high cruising speed, and he could do well in the Derby. I'm not saying that he's a horse that I would be looking forward to pick in that race, and I have no idea what price they're going to be or how they're going to bet the Derby because we're still a long way out, but I don't want to be too down on him because he does have quite a bit of ability. As for win, he did have major trouble on the far turn. I don't want to dismiss that. He was kind of in the midst of his run, and he did get stopped in traffic briefly. I don't know if it cost him. I'm pretty sure it didn't cost him the victory. It probably cost him maybe a length and a half of position, and he would have been closer and a clear second in this race. I too, like you were saying, I have some doubts about how far Win really wants to go. To me, he was a more brilliant closing sprinter, and he's just sort of grinding away, going these longer distances. But he is a horse that I could see some people liking out of this race because we'll get to it a bit later, but people were talking about the way the track was playing at Keeneland on Saturday, and Win is a horse that did run a different sort of race than a lot of horses that were successful on the dirt on Saturday. And we'll talk about that in depth a little bit more later. But I kind of agree with you that he's a horse that has run okay, but I haven't really seen anything exceptional out of him on this Derby trail as of yet. I don't know if there's anybody else you really want to discuss out of this race. Some like it, Hop Brown, as you were saying, ran okay. But to me, everybody else was just kind of an also ran.
Yeah, I'm the same. I guess Signal Man surprised me a little bit, but somebody had to be third. He's yet to run particularly fast. I assume I don't know. I think he's probably on the fence as far as getting in the Derby or now. But I don't like him at all. I mean, if somebody wanted to throw him in their super, I guess it'd be hard to argue with because, he'll be running a bit late. But just not a fan of much in here outside of Acoma.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And we'll wrap up the Derby preps by looking at the Santa Anita Derby, which was the final prep run on Saturday. And you gave this race the lowest speed figure, and I want to talk about that a little bit as we talk about this race and transition into the Santa Anita Handicap, which we'll get to next. Roadster beat his stablemate Game Winner in this race, and they had different sorts of trips. And I've seen two different perspectives on how these horses ran. A lot of people seem to be really impressed by Roadster. I'm of the opinion that I was a little bit more impressed by Game Winner's performance. I thought Roadster got the more comfortable trip, kind of sitting inside most of the race and running these horses down late, whereas Game Winner was wide throughout. But I think it's an interesting discussion as to how this race unfolded and the different types of trips that these two horses worked out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was not as impressed by this race as many people were. And some of that has to do with the clock. The winner only got a 113 TimeformUS speed figure. Game Form got a little bit higher at 115, which is in line with what he's been running. He definitely lost substantial ground in this race compared to his rivals, particularly the first and third place finishers. So I don't think a 115, there's nothing to be disgraced about in there and think he's a toss come Derby day because I think he's a good quality horse. But I think you got to have some questions. That's 2 in a row he's lost this year. The horses he was considered superior then. The wide trips do concern me. It seems like maybe that's a habit or something they want to do. Maybe he doesn't like being down inside horses, but he just hasn't shown that same brilliance he did as a 2-year-old. And I'm not sure he's stepped up all that much.
One of the misconceptions that I want to clear away in analysis of this race is something about the pace. I've seen a lot of people mentioning that the pace of this race was slow and that Roadster overcame it. That wasn't the case at all, especially if you look at pace figures. The pace certainly wasn't fast, but it definitely wasn't slow either. As you were mentioning, Game Winner got a bump up off his final TimeformUS speed figure of 3 points, whereas Roadster got no bump because Roadster took advantage of an honest pace ahead of him. It's not like the leaders were going red color-coded fractions, but they were moving up front. And I thought Mike Smith really made the difference on Roadster because he kept his cool on the far turn where the more fancied runners hooked up on the front end. Mike Smith just didn't seem to be afraid to let Roadster settle and drop back a little bit. And as soon as he asked this horse, he used his turn of foot to go after the leaders and catch them in the lane. Roadster almost reminds me of a turf horse in the way he runs. He can really shut off whether he's on the lead or whether he's coming from off the pace and just really produce an effective turn of foot. And I think that makes him very dangerous in races like this. I'm a little bit concerned that we haven't seen Roadster overcome adversity yet, whereas Game Winner has gotten tougher trips. He was wide in the Rebel and really had to grind out that second place finish. Same thing here. He was wide throughout. I think I looked up the Trackus numbers. He was 38. He ran 38 feet more than Roadster, and I believe 69 more feet than Instagram, who was third in this race. And that equates to a difference of 4 lengths more than Roadster and about 7.5 lengths more than Instagram. So ground loss really does make a difference in these races. And Game Winner, to me, almost reminds me a little bit of Silver Charm for Baffert. He's not running the kind of speed figures that Silver Charm ran, but he's running deceptively well in these races. And he's such a fighter. When Joe Rosario asked him at the 8th pole, it looked like he was going to lose this race by about a length and a half, because Roadster had the momentum and was just going right by him. But Game Winner is really fought back and showed a lot of grit and determination in the final 1/8 of a mile of this race. I get the sense he's not going to have trouble going the 1.25 miles. And I wonder if Roadster is going to be able to duplicate this feat in a more crowded field where he's going to have to make his way through traffic or run from farther back in the pack. I feel like we haven't seen a whole lot of Roadster yet.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know what to make of Roadster. He still hasn't run particularly fast. As you mentioned, he's been running in nothing but short fields. A 6-horse field. It's one thing if you're a horse like Justify or American Pharaoh back when he won, that you're in short fields, but you got a high cruising speed and you're going to be up near the front anyway. I don't really see that with Roadster. He hasn't run fast early. I assume because of the Bob Baffert name, he's going to be heavily bet, and he's one I'm going to be against. I'm not saying he can't win the race. He certainly could. It wouldn't shock me, but I just think from a betting standpoint, there's not going to be any value at all with him.
Yeah, I think it was interesting to see sort of the disparity in opinions between who people want out of these races. And it is an interesting discussion, and it gets into an evaluation of different types of trips and the kinds of horses you prefer moving on to the Kentucky Derby. I just thought it was pretty fascinating. But I think you and I are pretty much on the same page about these horses. At least we saw some horses who had previously run well in Derby preps come back and repeat those efforts or improve on them here. So I think all of these horses have really solidified themselves toward the top of the division. And we'll see if that happens next week in the Arkansas Derby with Improbable and Omaha Beach, as well as Long Range Toddy. We're looking for all of those horses to run well, but it's still wide open, and it seems like there's no clear Derby favorite at this point in time. We'll stick with Santa Anita for now and move on to the Santa Anita Handicap, which was run 2 races later than the Santa Anita Derby. And we'll start by discussing the differential in times between these 2 races, because I saw that Beyer made a different decision than you did and your colleague in evaluating how fast these races relative to each other were between the Santa Anita Handicap and the Santa Anita Derby. The Santa Anita Handicap, based on final time, was indisputably a faster race. It did have a different pace situation, though, and I think that might have benefited both of the top 2 finishers. Giftbox and McKinsey ran very well, but they did have relatively soft trips in doing so.
Yeah, we have this race coded in blue. All of the fractions are blue. The early pace figure was, I think it was 105 or 106 to the first quarter mile, 112 at the half mile. So for alleged grade 1 horses, that's pretty slow. They did finish up with a final time figure, both of them 129. I mean, it was noses on the wire. Looked like it could have went either way, although I was pretty impressed with the track announcer who called it right away for Giftbox. Because of the slow pace, they're both knocked down to 127, which is just a little bit below par for grade 1 older horses. I'd call it a grade 1 race. It was basically a match race, in my opinion. There was no other real competition in this field. But as you mentioned, from the speed figure point of view, the spread between this and the Santa Anita Derby was a pretty big one if you just use the standard speed charts that Beyer or a guy like myself uses. It was about 12 points. I decided to go by the clock for this and all the other races. I say me, my assistant, who's actually in Los Angeles, actually does California. He's very familiar with the track. We track it every day. I mean, it wasn't just the 3 route races that were run on this day. There were several sprints on the dirt, and we have a pretty good handle on what the relationship is between routes and sprint races. So you either had to believe that the Santa Anita Handicap track was just faster, it sped up somehow to rate these races differently, and my partner just didn't think so, and I didn't either. We found it hard to believe that Santa Anita would do anything to speed up the track, given the current situation out there and the problems they've been having with horse injuries. So we decided to just go with the clock on both of these races. It wasn't even a lot of discussion. We both made the same decision independently. So when we came together to talk about it, there wasn't a whole lot to discuss. We agreed that the way to go was to rate the races by the clock, and that's how we came up with the numbers we did.
Yeah, this is one that I definitely would think to give you a hard time about. And, I'm not afraid to give you a hard time about these. I can totally see playing this one straight, because really the only horse that the number doesn't make sense for is the third place finisher in the Santa Anita Handicap, the long shot Mongolian groom. But given that horse's pedigree and the fact that he seems like one that wants to run all day, it is conceivable that he would have improved a bit going out to the 10 furlong distance. And he, too, got a great trip just sitting inside behind the speeds, relatively close to the pace. So I buy it. I'm not really questioning this one. As for the top two finishers, I thought it was interesting to kind of draw parallels between this race and the Santa Anita Derby from a tactics perspective, because it's the same two riders fighting down to the finish. Joe Rosario on gift box down towards the inside, as he was on Game Winner in the Santa Anita Derby, and Mike Smith coming up on the outside on McKenzie, who he actually won the Santa Anita Derby with Roadster coming down the center of the track. And it was different. It was interesting to see the difference in riding styles between these two, whereas Mike Smith was using a little more finesse to get these horses home. Rosario was really kind of picking up and getting into gift box at the end of this race. And it worked for him on both occasions, but it really paid dividends in the Santa Anita Handicap because gift box gutted out the victory, which is a little surprising given that gift box is a horse that has been a little camera shy in the past. When he was in Chad Brown's barn, he had dropped a bunch of close decisions in photo finishes at short prices, but he seems to just have taken that slight step forward since getting into John Sadler's barn. And the distance obviously helped him a little bit more than McKenzie. I'm not sure these are really top handicap horses. I'm not sure they're going to be winning a ton more grade one races down the line, but given the landscape right now, they're winning and beating what's out there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I don't know what the competition is out there right now. I mean, I keep hoping somebody will step up. I guess you could say these horses did with 127s, because it's about as good as we've seen since the Pegasus, and most of those, the top horses from that race aren't racing anymore. So, it's just a weak division this year, and maybe somebody will change. Gift Box has certainly looked like a better horse. I think it's always neat to see horses like him who showed a lot of talent stick around. And it's kind of a conundrum, because the only reason he's probably still around is because he underperformed a little bit. But when you actually get to see him stick around and develop and run at 5 and 6 years old, it's just fun for me. I like seeing it, kind of a throwback to the old days when we'd see horses stick around longer.
Yeah, I agree with that. He just seems to be getting better with age, and whether it's the barn change that's improved him or not, or just moving out to the West Coast, he does seem to be hitting his best stride now as a 5-year-old. The one race on the Saturday at Santa Anita that probably took a hit because of the decision to not split out the Santa Anita Handicap from the other races was the Santa Anita Oaks for Bellafina, who did not earn a big TimeformUS speed figure for her victory in this race. It was just a 4-horse field, and she looked great doing it, but I'm not sure that anybody behind her was really running. I'm not sure that anybody behind her really wants to even go a mile and 16th at this point in time, and Bellafina was able to outclass them. I'm not sure what to make of this performance from her. She's looked great in her prep races, but I'm still not quite convinced that she is the dominant force in this division that a lot of people are it seems like people are just conceding the Oaks to her basically at this point. And she doesn't have a huge speed figure edge on these horses. And it's going to be pretty interesting to see how she does stack up when she ships back to Churchill Downs for that race.
I agree. I'm not a big fan of hers. I mean, she's looked good doing it, but I don't think she's beaten much. She's doing it in really short fields. And just in the back of my head, I keep picturing that juvenile fillies where, she kind of looked the same, like she had the field over a barrel, and she just didn't really show up. I mean, she ran okay, I guess, but certainly nothing like she looked on her form coming in. And, I just get the sense it's more the competition that's making her look good than her herself.
Yeah, and I'm just envisioning a Kentucky Oaks scenario where you've got Serengeti Empress, assuming that she makes it back. I would assume Jaywalk is going to move on to the Kentucky Oaks. You've got Motion Emotion, who I'm hoping is going to run okay this weekend. if all these horses are in the gate, Bellafina is going to be in a difficult position chasing all of them. And I still have some concerns about her getting the mile on the eighth distance. I don't want to be too hard on her because she's accomplished the most up until this point. It's just I don't think that she's a horse that she's not a Rachel Alexandra type. I don't think we're going to be seeing any sort of massive win out of her in the Oaks because she just doesn't have that kind of speed figure edge. As for the other horses in the Santa Anita Oaks, chasing yesterday, she was just exposed at this point. Her race at Sunland Park came up alarmingly slow, and I think it's confirmed at this point that she's just not quite the same filly that she was as a 2-year-old, and she's taken a step in the wrong direction. And Bob Baffert had another filly in here, Florida Lamar, but I'm not sure that she really wanted to go the distance either. So Bellafina just was sort of handed this victory in a mediocre time, and we'll see if she can improve moving forward. I'm somewhat skeptical like you, though.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And hey, as horse players, this is what we're looking for. You want races where you don't like the favorite. To me, that's what makes a great betting race. I've seen it kind of discussed on Twitter where people are saying, oh, the Derby's going to be a great betting race because it's wide open. But to me, a great betting race is one where you have a strong opinion, particularly one where you don't like the favorite. And I think that's how the Oaks is leaning toward for me.
Yeah, I feel the same way about that. I'm looking forward to handicapping those races because it seems like there will be many ways to go. Before we move back east, we'll discuss one more race from California. The American version of Winx, or hope I don't get any flack for that, wins the Royal Heroine, Vasilika, who has gone out west and just been a sensation. I believe she's 16 for 31 at this point for Jerry Hollendorfer, who has done an amazing job with her. She was 1-5 in this race. It's no shock that she won, but it's just pretty cool to see a horse like her continuing to achieve success.
Yeah, she's made it a spectator game out there. I was foolish enough to try to mildly go against her on the out of the gate segment with the one of the foreign shippers, which didn't work out too well when that one ran fourth. But at this point, she just has the fillies and mares out west over her barrel. She can run any style. She comes, from just off the piece. She comes from well off the piece. It just doesn't seem to matter. She's a better horse than these. She won easy. She won by almost 3 lengths, which equates to probably about a 5-length win on dirt. It's always a little different on turf. She did it with another 119 speed figure. She seems to run in the high teens and low 20s at will, just like a machine. So at this point, until I can find, maybe if she ships east, she'll face some competition. But if she keeps running out west, I'm just going to be watching these races.
Yeah, I kind of hope they take a shot in Majestic Game with her because I really think that would be a perfect spot for her. She seems like she's at her best going that flat mile distance. She's just so dangerous, and she has such a great kick going that trip. And Majestic Game would be a really nice fit for her. She'd obviously have to face some of the best fillies in the country, and I assume Chad Brown will have a lot of firepower in that race. But if they're going to find out if she can compete against top grade 1 fillies on the East Coast, I think that would probably be the spot to do it in. But she's certainly developed quite the resume out west. She's a horse that is really fun to watch. We'll go back to Aqueduct to wrap up the Wood Memorial Day undercard. And we'll go back to the 3-year-old fillies to kind of finish up or get halfway through the Oaks preps by discussing Always Shopping's win in the Gazelle. And I think the pace of this race is really where you need to begin because there wasn't a whole lot of speed going in. And the 2 horses that were up close to the pace towards the beginning of the race, it was really over by the time they hit the clubhouse turn because Positive Spirit and Always Shopping were right there coming up to the top of the stretch. And they just didn't let the closers get involved at all. Not the fastest race. And I already see Always Shopping's connections, questioning whether they'd even move on to the Kentucky Oaks because I think they know that's going to be a tough spot.
Yeah, it's a slow race. The group in New York has been slow all along. I was actually on off topic here, and I was really disappointed at the beginning when Johnny Velasquez kind of ceded the lead. And then when I saw the opening fractions, I knew it was probably a shot in the long shot that she was going to get up. The pace was really slow. We do have all the fractions coded in blue, but I'm not sure. That's what these fillies have been running anyway. The winner got a 101. I don't think she's hit more than 102 so far. So I think it's a weak group. I wouldn't want any of these horses in the Oaks going forward, and I just don't have a lot of good things to say about this race. The Wood was run at the same distance. The time differential is pretty huge, and that just further backs up that it's just not a good race.
Yeah, I was actually on off topic to her. She was one of my best bets of the day. And Todd Pletcher had said before the race that the plan with her was to be aggressive. And I don't know if that just flew out the window or if Velasquez made a different decision on the fly. But he had no intention of taking her to the lead, despite the fact that she actually broke well for the first time in her career. So that was kind of frustrating to watch because I think she could have won the race with a different trip. But I agree. Regardless of who won this race, I don't think these are major players in the Kentucky Oaks. The horse that might go on to the Oaks that was compromised most is Espresso Shot. I'm not sure she's really a mile and an eighth horse, but it is worth pointing out that she had absolutely no chance in this race based on the way it unfolded. But like you were saying, these are just relatively slow fillies. Another race that didn't get a very high speed figure from us was the Carter, though only Grade 1 race on Saturday at Aqueduct. And World of Trouble got his Grade 1 victory, I believe his first graded stakes victory of any kind, as he went back and was focusing on the dirt to run in this race. He was a heavy favorite. He got the job done. But to me, this was another perplexing race to watch unfold because these horses, including World of Trouble and Skylar Scramjet and some others, they have a ton of early speed. And nobody was intent on using their speed. It was just a crawl down the backstretch, and it really affected the outcome of this race and the final time they were able to achieve.
Yeah, it was unbelievable, really. Sometimes there just seems to be no rhyme nor reason what these guys are doing on these horses. World of Trouble, he's a good horse. He only got a 112 from me. The final time was a 119, which was a little bit quicker than the Bayshore. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But that just shows that TimeformUS, the adjustments we make. The 119 was knocked down to a 112. Do I think World of Trouble is a 112 horse? No, of course not. I'm not going to rate the horse off of that when he won. He did lose some ground. So the figure really doesn't mean much in these races with the all blue fractions. That's the way I look at it as a handicapper. And I would fully expect him to run well into the 120s if he's given a decent pace. And just leave you scratching your head. I guess I could have given it the old question mark code we use for pace and kind of upgraded it. But with so many races on the card and that final time at 119, I mean, it's there for all the people that use our products to see so they can see what happened. I mean, if I just knocked this race out and made it a 120 or whatever, I'm just lying about the final time figure. And in this case, it was close enough. I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, I was at Wood Memorial Day with my father, and we were talking about this race afterwards, and he made an interesting point to me. He was saying that Manny Franco rode World of Trouble like he was trying to ensure that Vino Rosso lost the race, as if he was his only competition. And that's an interesting tactic, and that might have been something that might have gone into the thinking behind the way they rode World of Trouble, because I could see how they thought they had Skylar Scramjet and Honor Up easily beaten, and the only way that Vino Rosso was going to win this race is if he got a little bit of pace to run at, and if World of Trouble didn't really want to go the 7 furlongs. But they really rode World of Trouble in a fashion to ensure that he got the 7 furlongs, and it just totally took Vino Rosso out of his game and gave him no shot. Vino Rosso actually ran fine in this race, and he was closing pretty well at the end, but he's never going to be successful under those kinds of circumstances. And I would hope that they stretch Vino Rosso out in the future, because I don't think he wants any part of 7 furlongs in these top races.
No, that's a really good point by your dad. And you kind of stole my thunder. I was going to say he's the only horse that I really think ran decent given the circumstances other than the winner. And, it's clearly too short for him. I understand him, I guess, taking the shot in the Grade 1. There's probably not a whole lot on the calendar for them right now coming up. So it looked like a relatively soft Grade 1. But given the pace, he just had no chance. So decent effort, but yeah, I expect to see him going much longer from now on.
A race that went slightly slower than the Carter in terms of final time, but earned a higher speed figure from us, was the Bayshore. And I know this was just a 4-horse field, but for me, this was one of the highlights of Wood Memorial Day, because this was a really fun battle between two up-and-coming 3-year-olds who have a ton of talent in mind control and much better. And they went a quick pace up front. And Mind Control, he just seems to know where the wire is. He just seems to keep improving with every star, and kudos to his connections for doing the right thing by this horse, resisting the temptation to move on to the Wood Memorial and target the Kentucky Derby, and just focus on one-turn races where he can really excel, and I think it's paying dividends for them.
Yeah, this was a bit of a weird betting race, if you ask me. I mean, on paper, as a speed figure guy, this was strictly a two-horse race. The gap between the top two and the next two on speed figures was huge, but the odds didn't really reflect that. We almost had a stair step, 1, 2, 3, and 4 to 1. And, I thought that the other two had no shot, and the top two, Mind Control and Much Better, just hooked up. Through the lane, and it was a good effort. Mind Control was just, man, he's a really good horse. He's starting to look like one of the best 3-year-old sprinters out there.
Well, I think that just illustrates the betting in this race that not enough people are using the TimeformUS speed figures, because we tried to tell everybody the Gotham was a very fast race based on the pace, and Much Better validated his performance there. He earned a 120 in the Gotham, and he got a 124 here, improving that number. He's a really nice horse, Much Better. He's still, I think he's still figuring things out, and he's just starting to get good for Bob Baffert. But I'm interested to see how these horses progress and hold their form moving ahead to races like the Woody Stevens, because they are top class grade 1 type horses, especially Mind Control. And we'll see if some horses turn back out of the Derby, if some horses don't get the distance. Maybe even a horse like Vekoma eventually winds up in the Woody Stevens. But I'm looking forward to this 3-year-old sprint division, because I think there's a lot of talent out there in these shorter races.
Yeah, that's a good point you make. I mean, I mentioned that Mind Control ran a 122, Much Better, even a little bit higher at 124 due to the fast pace. And, the thing with if you think about it, none of the Derby preps have come close to these figures. I mean, they're close, but none of them have run as fast as these sprinters have. And that's not really been the case on our figures. Generally, we're pretty even throughout. The sprinters and the routers run about the same thing. So the sprinters, these is really strong for 3-year-olds this time of year.
Yeah, looking forward to these upcoming races in that division. The last race we want to discuss from Saturday at Aqueduct was the Excelsior. Not the strongest field, especially after the scratch of the morning line favorite Discreet Lover, who was the class of the race. And that left Life's a Parlay as a somewhat surprising favorite. He got the job done. He got the 9 furlongs. He was up on a legitimate pace. He really did benefit, though, from getting chased home by a horse that just has no interest in hitting the line first.
Yeah, and it showed. I mean, it looked like that horse in Monongahela. I assume it's pronounced like the river. Yeah, he just, he always kind of makes that run, and he's like, I'm done. I'm good where I am, and doesn't seem to want to get to the wire. I was a little perplexed by this horse being the favorite. I think you were as well, if I remember seeing on Twitter. But this was one of those, as our friend Andy Serling likes to say, they knew. And, he ran well. He ran better than I expected. He got a 119. Wasn't a whole lot in this field. I was happy for the race because it gave us a third point of comparison with the Wood and the Gazelle. So that's always a good thing for speed figure guys. That's always a question when you start getting out the races as long as 9 furlongs and beyond, if you're going to have a lot to work with. So that was my highlight of this race, was just having those extra data points.
Yeah, I don't think this is a race we have to spend a whole lot of time on, because I don't think these are really talented horses in the handicap division. It is interesting to use it as a comparison, though, as you were saying. Before we move away from Aqueduct, we've got to turn back to Friday and discuss what I believe was the most impressive performance of the entire weekend, which was Come Dancing's victory in the Distaff Handicap. It's an interesting race to discuss from a speed figure perspective, because it featured a very slow pace that allowed this filly to run a very fast final time. But it throws the race into it makes some questions apparent about the horse that finished behind her and what kind of figures they really deserve, because the final time was almost unbelievably fast given the speed of the racetrack.
Yeah, it was definitely a slow track at Aqueduct that day. So, I mean, just for some perspective, you were saying how fast the pace was. I don't have the raw fractions in front of me, but most people wouldn't look at those fractions and say it was a very fast pace. But when you put it in perspective of how all the other races ran, and I think there was only 1, maybe 2 turf races on the day. So we had a whole bunch of dirt races that day. And it was just a fast race, and I really did struggle with this one. it just, I mean, we wound up giving Come Dancing a 134. As David can tell you, I originally had it as a 119. I kind of broke it out from the race from the others. It was the last dirt race of the day, so that's not something that's terribly unusual to do. There are times when the track changes and you don't have anything after to confirm it. But David wrote to me, made a compelling argument about several of the horses, and generally I do like this side on the side of the clock. So I didn't take a whole lot of convincing. Most people who know me will know I can be pretty hard-headed if I'll stick to my guns. If I really was locked in and said, no way this horse ran a 134, I would do that. But I tended to agree with you. I see that Andy Beyer made the same call. He gave the race a big 114, which basically matches up to our number. So this will be an interesting race to track going forward. The visual certainly matched the number. I mean, she was just running away from these horses at the end. The big question mark for me is the runner-up. All the other horses kind of fall in line with what they've been running, but Pacific Gale is the head scratcher.
Yeah, and I'll get to her in just a second. We all watch a lot of races, and you know when you see something special and when you just see something ordinary. And I remember watching this race in real time and almost in disbelief that this filly did what she did, or this mare rather, because I've been watching her throughout her career, and she's had plenty of stops and starts. She's had some well-documented physical issues. She's a really big, good-looking horse who's just taken a while to get totally sound and really hit her best stride, but she was getting very good towards the end of last year. She ran that remarkable race behind Marley's Freedom, giving that filly everything that she could handle in the Go for Wand back last December. And she came off the layoff here. And I remember Maggie Wolfendale, who's the excellent paddock analyst at NYRA, was just raving about the way that she looks. And I remember Maggie has never been the biggest fan of this filly, but she really thought that she looked better than ever. And if you've been following Carlos Martin's stable in the past few weeks, he's had a lot of horses running very well. The barn just seems to be firing on all cylinders. And they got this filly into top form, and you could see coming around the far turn, she's just flicking her ears back and forth. She actually had them pointed straight forward at the quarter pole, like she was just waiting for her rider's cue, and she exploded like a turf horse in the last quarter mile. I mean, watching a lot of races at Aqueduct in this winter, especially when the track is kind of dead like it was on Friday, you just don't see horses come home with the speed that she did. It was remarkable to watch. And if she can repeat this performance, she is going to be the division leader throughout the year. It's just a matter with her of can she stay sound and can she maintain this form. But this was a special effort. As you were referring to with Pacific Gale, she is the problematic horse. If you're going to give this race a high figure, as I think is the right call, how I would look at it is kind of just take Come Dancing out of the race for a second, because I know it sounds wrong to give a horse a number in the 120s and have that horse lose by almost 8 lengths, but Come Dancing turned in a freakish effort. So let's just disregard her for a second and talk about the normal earthbound horses. Pacific Gale would have won this race by 6 lengths with an absolutely perfect trip. She would have been on the rail, right up on the pace throughout, and would be able to kick home off slow fractions. So to me, it's conceivable that a horse like Pacific Gale, who had been improving recently, I know that you also had a difficult call to make on her race 2 back at Gulfstream Park, where she was second in another slow-paced race behind Kieran McLaughlin horse Dream Pauline, who was impressive in victory. So Pacific Gale to me is a horse that has been improving for a while, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that she may have run very well in this race and taken another step forward given her trajectory.
Yeah, and like I said, I can buy that. I mean, I definitely changed the figure, so I am good with it and really curious to look forward to seeing how these horses run back. The one thing I do want to mention, you said slow pace a couple times, where I actually said the fractions were pretty quick. It's all kind of relative. I mean, when I say the fractions are slow, it's in comparison to the final time, which they were. But in this case, Come Dancing said pace figures of 125 to the quarter and the half. So, I mean, it's pretty solid. I don't want to give the impression the horse was out there dawdling on the lead.
Well, one point I want to make about that actually is you can tell me better than I can just look by eyeballing it. But the speed of this track compared to Saturday, I would say I think they're pretty similar. Maybe the Saturday track was a bit faster, you can tell me. But the fractions of this race were almost identical to those of the Carter, whereas World of Trouble was able to come home in, I think, 123 and 1 maybe. Come Dancing came home in 122-1. So if Come Dancing had been in the Carter, she probably would have put 6 or 7 lengths between herself and World of Trouble from the quarter pole to the wire, which is kind of mind-boggling to think about.
Yeah, that's pretty quick. I'll look this up while you segue us into the next race. I don't remember the exact track speeds, and I think it's pretty important, so I want to get it right.
Yeah, I think
it's it up right now. No, I have the track on Friday actually as about 9 points slower than the track on Saturday. And our points are very similar to Beyer, so a few lengths.
So she might have put even more distance between herself and World of Trouble if she had been running in the Carter, going that pace that Skylar Scramjet was setting, and she would have been on the lead in that race. And that's just I think it's worth thinking about that when you're assessing this race, because unless the track just miraculously got fast for one race on Friday, Come Dancing did actually run that well. We'll move on to the final segment of today's show, and we've got a lot of races to talk about from Keeneland throughout the opening weekend that they spent there. We'll start with the races on Saturday. And as we discuss these dirt races, the dirt stakes, I do want to touch upon discussion of a track bias, because it seems like a lot of people are convinced that there was either a rail bias or a speed bias at Keeneland on Saturday on the dirt. And I'm not totally convinced of either one. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm very convinced that there was not a rail bias. I see no evidence of that. And I think people that are asserting that are looking for something that's not there. The speed bias question is an interesting one. But I see that this track is not color-coded light pink or red in the TimeformUS PPs. So the algorithm didn't come up with a speed bias. But some of the races that we'll talk about, we can kind of frame them within that context. And we'll begin with the Ashland. And I think this is the race that a lot of people are pointing to as they try to make a case for a speed bias, because we had a massive long shot win racing towards the front end throughout.
Yeah, Out for a Spin ran a 111 winning, basically going wire. I mean, she wasn't wire to wire. She was right up on the lead with Jaywalk. That 111's a huge jump off her 94 last time out, which I believe was a maiden breaking win, if I'm not mistaken. And, it's just a big jump, but I'm not buying the bias thing. I think it's a dirt track. They inherently favor speed, and I think that's what we saw on Saturday. But I don't think it was anything all that out of the ordinary. I mean, we had a lot of races won by very heavy favorites who expected to win and expected to show speed. So I'm going to be really careful and not give too much credit to the horses that closed in here. As for Out for a Spin, the figures are a surprise, but as a guy who makes figures for nearly every track every day, for a 3-year-old to jump up like this, especially a top class one, it's just not that big of a surprise. And I generally take it at face value. I think she ran very well. She was right there dueling with Jaywalk, the 2-year-old champion. And she didn't put her away, but she held off the runner-up from last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile fillies, who ran very well indeed as well. Restless Rider, that was quite a return coming back, having not run since November.
Yeah, I thought she and Jaywalk ran okay in this race. Restless Rider, to me, she just ran like she needed the race. She kind of got there at the end and couldn't quite seal the deal. We saw that out of her in a couple races last year, but I'm not sure that she's a horse that necessarily has hang in her. I think she might have just gotten a little bit tired at the end, whereas the winner, even though she was improving, she had a little more recency. As for Jaywalk, she ran better than she did at Gulfstream, that's for sure. Should she have won this race? Well, if there was a rail bias or a speed bias, then she certainly should have won. But she ran a 110 TimeformUS speed figure, which is only 3 points lower than what she got in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. So she's moving in the right direction. I do hope they go on to the Kentucky Oaks with Jaywalk, because it's not the toughest field this year. And if she is moving in the right direction, I think she deserves a shot at that race. I think she's one of the horses that shouldn't have a problem getting the 9 furlong distance. To me, she's better the farther they go. But I think all 3 of these horses are fine. We'll see if Out for a Spin can repeat this effort next time out, because she's the one that hasn't done it before. But it's worth noting that all 3 of these horses, Jaywalk, Restless Rider, and Out for a Spin, earned faster TimeformUS speed figures than Bellafina.
Yeah, I think this was by far the strongest of the Oaks points races that we saw on Saturday. And I would expect all of these to run pretty well come Oaks Day.
I feel the same way. We'll head on to the Madison, sticking with the fillies and mares. And Spice Perfection got the best of Amy's Challenge, who we like on this podcast. Amy's Challenge, she's had 2 impressive blowout wins at Oaklawn to start the year, and they did the right thing by her, running her in this Grade 1 race, and they almost got rewarded. She really ran a valiant race, Amy's Challenge, battling back right until the wire. But Spice Perfection, she's just such an honest filly. She's really in great form right now. She collects her second Grade 1 win. Now in the Peter Miller barn. And this is a fun division. There's some talented fillies and mare sprinters out there. They're not going to have a prayer against Come Dancing if she continues to run the way that she did in the Distaff. But this race was fine from a speed figure perspective. And both of these horses are nice fillies.
Yeah, they definitely are. Amy's Challenge, we've talked, she runs a lot this year, so we keep talking about her. And I think we both probably suspected that 6 furlongs is her best distance, but she ran very well for 7. She got a 1:20:21 TimeformUS speed figure, a little bit higher than Spice Perfection. That's really close. It was virtually a match race. It's just because she was about a length in front of her at the half mile, running a little bit faster early. But it was just these 2 pulled away from the others. We had the Charlestown, Queen of Charlestown late night powwow way back in third. They really gapped the field. So strong effort from the top 2. Late night powwow, good story, but she was a little over her head this time. She ran basically what she runs all the time. People can be deceived by the margin. She was 7 lengths back, but she still ran a 1:11, which is right around what she always does. She just got beat by 2 horses that were really on their game on Saturday.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Late Night Powwow was a little bit exposed here because she didn't run the fastest race in the Barbara Fritchie with a very good trip that day, and Spice Perfection turned the tables on her here and is probably just the better horse. The gap between the top 2 and the rest of the field, some people might say, is more evidence of a speed bias, and I think it is worth entertaining something like that. If I had to compare this track to any other dirt track that sometimes features a speed bias on a regular basis, the race is almost played out like the Meydan track in Dubai, where the horses that stayed out of the kickback just seemed to have more energy in the lane. Throughout the day, horses were having trouble making up ground, but it might have just been more circumstance, and a lot of it had to do with pace as well. And it's worth discussing the pace as we move on to the next race, which was the Commonwealth, the 7 furlong race for older male horses. And Bobby's Wicked One was able to get loose on the front end through pretty moderate fractions, and the 2 speed horses that were supposed to challenge him, Recruiting Ready and Uncontested, both of them didn't break that well. Recruiting Ready got into a position where he could have challenged, and Louis Saez elected to take him out of that spot and rate off the pace, and it just allowed Bobby's Wicked One to get a perfect trip, setting slow fractions on the lead.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. This was a good one for TimeformUS. We actually had this horse picked right on top on our power picks based on that big 125 he ran at the fairgrounds last time out. But I mean, I'm not going to deny we also had the race picked as one that was going to have a fast pace, and it just never materialized and pretty much handed the race to him from that outside post. He was able to get the lead fairly comfortably and had plenty left for the finish. The Venerable Warriors Club, who just always seems to run well for Wayne Lucas. I always root for this horse at least a little bit, even if I don't bet on him. I like to see him do well. Ran his usual good race in the high 1-teens. So, good race. Hard to say what I'd take out of this one. The Limousine Liberal ran well. I'd expect him to run well at Churchill. Given the pace, he had little shot, but he still made up some nice ground at the end. He was beaten less than 2 lengths. So him and the winner are the 2 that I would like the most coming out of here.
Yeah, Bobby's Wicked One had run some fast speed figures coming into this race. As you were mentioning, he got a real class test here, and he was up to the challenge. But one thing I want to mention about this race in regards to a potential rail bias is this race, to me, even though a horse won the race that rode the rail the entire way, this race actually really refutes the rail bias theory, because let's just take Bobby's Wicked One out of the race for a second. And I think when people are evaluating biases, they often put way too much emphasis on the winner alone. It's about more than who won the race. If you take Bobby's Wicked One out, well, Warriors Club and Limousine Liberal were as wide as can be for their entire trips, and they were the 1-2 finishers in this race last year, so they ran just as well this year and just were second and third because of an unfavorable pace scenario, not because they were against the track from a bias perspective. And I think that's important to note if you're a proponent of a rail bias on Saturday at Keeneland. Moving back to the turf for two more stakes races from Keeneland, one on Saturday and one on opening day Thursday, beginning with the Shakertown, which was at 5.5 furlongs. Boy, Imprimis is really good right now. For a lot of people, this was the most impressive performance from Keeneland on Saturday. This horse really went down to his knees at the start, a pretty bad stumble, and was wide the entire way around those tight turns on the turf course, and just came with this relentless run through the stretch. He is a really talented turf sprinter.
He is. I think we talked about him last time when he got a big 126 at Gulfstream, which is really a nice number for a turf sprinter. You don't often see that, but although the division does seem to be getting better the last couple of years, I'm sure the Breeders' Cup has something to do with that. We're getting more classy horses in there. I was curious what you thought about the trouble. I mean, he clearly did stumble at the start. I mean, there's no denying that. But to my eye, it didn't look like it cost him all that much. I mean, he didn't lose a whole lot of position. It's not like it cost him 3 or 4 lengths, in my opinion. But that's it. He's still a really good horse. He ran really fast. He ran a 123 again, despite that trouble. And he's probably at the top of the division right now.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. Would you prefer to see a horse not stumble at the start? Well, of course. But did this cost him position? I don't think it really did. He was always going to be coming from slightly off the pace in this race, and it's not like he was 10 lengths out of it. He was always relatively close. That said, he did have to work pretty hard to run down for Nowhere, who was the favorite in this race. And I don't think he had ever lost sprinting before in the United States. His prior losses sprinting had all come in Europe in some really tough spots. He had actually been, I think, third in the Diamond Jubilee at Ascot last summer. And maybe they're going to go back there with him off this performance because he clearly is back in top form down for Nowhere. He just got beaten by a better horse on this occasion. These are two very talented turf sprinters. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Imprimis. I know they ran him at Pimlico on Preakness Day last year. I would imagine the goal this summer would be the Jaipur at Belmont because the Jaipur has been elevated to a Grade 1 race, and I think that's a pretty important. It's pretty important for these turf sprinters to win the Grade 1 races that are out there since there are so few of them. But I'm looking forward to seeing these two meet again because they are two of the best horses in the division.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, along with Belvoir Bay, the mare, who I briefly forgot. I'd put her up there with these. But, yeah, really good. I think Bound for Nowhere, the plan is to point him to Ascot, and I'll certainly tune in to see that.
Another horse that might be going to Ascot is the winner of the Palisades Turf Sprint going back to opening day at Keeneland, Bulletin, who frankly didn't run that much slower than Imprimis in winning this race for restricted 3-year-olds. He got a 118 TimeformUS speed figure, 5 points lower than Imprimis. I know you would like this horse a lot last year in the Breeders' Cup, and he really has proven to be a special colt. He's just done absolutely nothing wrong in his 3 career starts. He just seems to handle everything perfectly. He breaks on top of the field. He relaxes on the lead. He's got a huge closing kick on him as he comes to the wire. This is a horse that I could see really handling a trip over to Ascot. He seems to have a great mind on him, and I'm becoming a fan of this horse. He seems like a pretty special colt.
He does. I mean, he kind of had, I don't want to say humble beginnings, but he started, his first race was at the Gulfstream meet, but not the championship meet or whatever they call it. It was much later in the year when fewer people are paying attention to Gulfstream, to be honest. And he ran that big number, which really popped off the page. He ran his 108 in the debut, and then he went right to the Breeders' Cup and backed it up and ran just as well, beat some fancied Euro shippers in there. Won pretty easy that day. And, he hadn't run since and came back and looked like he's better than ever. I mean, he got a big 118 for this one. He got the lead over some fast horses. There was a Wesley Ward filly in here people were talking about that was going to go for the lead, but he made it easily from that outside post. And just he is a special turf sprinter, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is worth noting that Gladiator King did have to scratch out of this race at the gate, and that might have affected the pace a little bit because Bulletin didn't have to run fast fractions up front, but it's hard to imagine that even Gladiator King's presence would have changed the outcome of this race. Bulletin is just a really talented, fast, adaptable 3-year-old, and I'll be interested to see where he goes from here on to Ascot or even to stretch out in distance in the future, because if you look at this horse's dam side pedigree, there's a lot of stamina there. He's actually a half-brother to Tismiz Sue, who won going 2 turns on the dirt, so he's bred to go longer, even though he's by City Zip, and he seems to have the mind to relax and do it as well, so wherever this horse shows up, I'll be watching closely. Before we wrap up the show, we'll just discuss a few more races from Keeneland throughout opening weekend, some notable non-stakes performances. And the one that most people were talking about before the stakes action on Saturday was Honest Mischief, who broke his maiden, I believe, in the third race. This son of Honest Lady had run well in his debut, had been highly touted for Chad Brown prior to that race, and delivered on that potential in his second start. A really impressive performance.
Yeah, he did. He lost first out to the Todd Pletcher horse, whose name's escaping me right now. But yeah, he came back with a real strong race, a TimeformUS Speed Figure 115, which, for a maiden breaker is about as strong as we give out, barring a really special horse. What I found interesting, I saw people comparing the times of this race, but this is a day where I definitely thought the track changed speeds. It was clearly faster, in my opinion, for the first three races of the day before it slowed down noticeably. It wasn't a tough call at all. But regardless, I mean, if I didn't make that decision, this horse is getting a 125 or a 130, and it just didn't fit with the rest of the field. I'm really comfortable with that 115. It's a good effort, showed a lot of talent, and I think he's a horse to be heard from in stakes very soon.
Completely agree with that. And another race that went pretty fast on Saturday was the allowance race won by Kofefi, who earned speed figure just 3 points lower than Honest Mischief. Part of that, I believe, was due to the faster pace of Kofefi's race. She won by a desperate half length or so. She really had to work hard to fend off an 8-1 shot that was challenging her throughout the stretch. But she came back in good form. This is a filly who had shown a high level of speed and precocity in her debut before just not wanting to go the distance in the Frisette last year. I imagine it's going to be on to the 8 Bells next time, and she'll face horses like Lyrical Lady, who we saw come back at Oaklawn last weekend very impressively, and that's shaping up to be an interesting race.
It is. And Take Charge Angel, why you mentioned she was 8-1, she was probably second or third choice just because of Kofefi's being 2-5 on the morning line. She was the horse that was supposedly the second coming last year. She debuted under a lot of pomp and circumstance, and I think she backed it up when she won, but she didn't really do much afterwards. But she came back and run well. She got a big figure for the race, and I'm curious to see where she's going to go going forward. She's got that big reputation, so I'm not sure you're ever going to get any value with her, but she's certainly one to track. Yeah,
and again, just to touch upon the rail bias situation, do you really think this 8-1 shot, or whether she was second or third choice, would have almost beaten Kofefi if Kofefi had the advantage of a rail bias on her side? I'm skeptical of that.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention Honest Mischief was nowhere near the rail either, and actually closed. I mean, he wasn't way back, but he was in fifth, 2-3 lengths back. So, he's another one, ran a big figure anyway. So if you believe there's a rail bias, then you even got to upgrade that. So I'm with you. I'm definitely skeptical there.
Yeah, we're on the same page about that. Wrapping up the show by moving back to Thursday and Friday. On Friday, we saw an allowance win by Intrepid Heart. Now, I know this wasn't the fastest race. It featured a very slow pace, which contributed to the fact that they did not earn a fast final speed figure. But I like what I saw from Intrepid Heart in this race. I know that there was a lot of buzz around him after he won his debut so impressively around 2 turns at Oaklawn back in March, or maybe that was February even. But I liked this race even better because he stalked another horse. He rated kindly. He looked to have no business even winning the race at the top of the stretch, as the horse who had set the pace and had benefited from those slow fractions kicked away from the field. But he showed a lot of determination to run that horse down. He's got this big horse with a nice long stride on him. He's got a pedigree to run all day. And I wouldn't be surprised if Todd Pletcher has the Belmont Stakes in mind moving down the road.
Yeah, he looked good. He looked beaten to me in the stretch. I had kind of written him off and was handing the race to High Crime in my eye. And he kind of suddenly seemed like he got his head together and kicked in and found another gear. And the impressive part about that is that the pace was slow, and it's not like High Crime was stopping or getting tired. They both ran strong through the wire, and he was able to put his head down and get by him by a good half length, and strong effort second out. I don't remember if it was first time around 2 turns or not. I know it was the longest he had run. So he impressed me despite the figure not being the greatest at 105. It's a solid effort, one I think he can build on.
Yeah, he just seems like this galloping type that is going to run all day. He's got the pedigree to do it. His dam produced Commissioner, who almost won the Belmont Stakes, as well as the dam of Vino Rosso. So there's a ton of stamina throughout this pedigree. And Intrepid Heart is a horse to watch moving forward, especially as the distances stretch out. We'll wrap up the show by discussing a couple of 2-year-old maiden performances. In the racing world, we always love to latch on to the newest, shiniest thing, and we'll mention the 2-year-olds because it's always exciting when they get going. The faster performance was the one on Thursday, the first race of the Keeneland meet, as Mean Sophia beat a field of suspect quality, but did so in very impressive fashion with a pretty quick final time.
She did. It was kind of interesting racing. There was no Wesley Ward entry in that race. I think the couple he had were on the also eligible list and scratched out. But a big number, it's 100. I get a lot of questions about making numbers for these races. And what I generally tell people is I do it when I think there's enough evidence to do one. There was one on Sunday over a sloppy track. It was the first race of the day. And I didn't make a number for that race just because I thought there was no information to use. I would have been a shot in the dark. It came back super slow on the clock. And if I used a variant from the other races, I would have basically been saying they were plow horses. So I do use some discretion when I make numbers for these, but the ones Thursday and Friday that we're going to talk about, I think they're legit. The 100 from Mean Sophia is a big number for a 2-year-old this time of year in April. She certainly got a lot of potential. And then Lady Pauline, the one who ran for Wesley Ward on Friday, only ran an 88. I say only because compared to Mean Sophia, but she did so easily, won by 9 3/4. So, if these two were to hook up, I don't think I'd bet my life on that 100 versus the 88. It's one of those where you just don't really know these horses won so easily. They're obviously both very talented. And I assume Lady Pauline will head to Ascot.
Yeah, I saw some people who are based in Europe were sharing the video of Lady Pauline's debut. Even though it was the slower race, people would be interested in this because Wesley Ward does send horses to Europe, and because, most notably, she is the half-sister to Lady Aurelia, who had so much success in races out there. I believe she won the Queen Mary as a 2-year-old and went back as a 3-year-old and won a Grade 1 race, a Group 1 race, rather. So Lady Pauline's got the pedigree to handle the turf, certainly, and to go on to some bigger and better things. She didn't earn a faster speed figure because the pace of her race was not particularly fast. She came home very fast. Her final 16th was run in less than 6 seconds, which is something you always want to look for with these 4.5 furlong races, horses that are actually finishing well. And she's got the pedigree to get better, as we mentioned. So Lady Pauline could have a bit of a future, but both of these horses are worth noting as we wait for some more 2-year-olds to come on the scene. As we're only in April, and that'll happen a lot more as we move on to the rest of the spring months. But we went a little over time today, Craig, but there was a lot to discuss, and I think we did a good job of getting through it all. I'm interested to see what happens next weekend. The Arkansas Derby will be the final Derby prep that we see. The Lexington is also going to be run on Saturday. I think there's some talk that another Twist of Fate might run there if he needs more points to come in. But that'll finish sorting out this Derby picture, and maybe we'll see a huge performance from Improbable or Omaha Beach that will solidify one of them as the Derby favorite. But as of now, it looks like a wide open picture. Are there any horses in particular that you're looking forward to seeing in the Arkansas Derby, and will you be there on Saturday?
I will. I'm actually going to be there all weekend, heading there Thursday, so I'll be there Friday for the fantasy. I'm looking forward to seeing Motion Emotion. Some friends of ours have a horse running for Todd Pletcher as well on Friday. And, of course, the Derby, Improbable, and I actually really like Omaha Beach, so we'll see how it goes. And the Apple Blossoms on Sunday, which is new with Gulfstream, with Oaklawn's new schedule this year of running through Derby Day. They've juggled it around a little bit, so I'm actually sticking around for Sunday where we get to see Elite for sure. I haven't looked to see who else is coming. I assume we'll see some more from the Azari as well.
Well, I am certain that we'll talk about all of that in depth on the show next Tuesday. For now, we'll wrap it up, and it's good to talk to you as always about these races, Craig. You can listen to us on drf.com, Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, SoundCloud. Just search for the Daily Racing Form and the TimeformUS Pacecast, and you can listen to us on any of those channels where you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening this week, guys, and we'll see you next week.